When we speak, our sentences often sound like they run together, even though in writing they would be separated by a period or a semicolon. When people write as though they were speaking, they often mistakenly join sentences together with a comma. This results in a problem known as a comma splice. In this lecture, you'll learn how to identify and correct comma splices. But first, we need to review some basics about how sentences fit together. Knowing how to identify independent and dependent clauses will help us figure out whether we're looking at a comma splice or not. An independent clause consists at a minimum of a subject and a main verb. It expresses a complete thought and can function on its own as a sentence. Here are some sample independent clauses. This one is very simple. She won. We have a subject, she, and a main verb, won. Here's another one that's a little bit more complex. Reluctantly, the mountaineers turned back. Here we have some modifiers, but we still have a clear subject, the mountaineers, and a main verb, turned. A dependent clause, also known as a subordinate clause, is a group of words that contains a subject and a verb, but does not express a complete thought. Here are some dependent clauses in bold within a complete sentence. Because the floor was wet, we turned on the fans. We stayed up until the sun rose. Although the slopes are still snowy, the ski mountain is closed. You can often identify a dependent clause by what is known as a dependent marker word. This is the word that introduces the dependent clause. Examples of dependent marker words include although, because, if, when, unless, and whenever. These words help signal that the clause does not express a complete thought. You can find a more complete list of dependent marker words on the course website. As you can see, dependent clauses are often, although not always, joined to independent clauses with a comma. This is a perfectly good sentence construction, so you need to be sure you can recognize a dependent clause so you don't mistake it for a comma splice. The problem occurs when a writer fuses two independent clauses together with a comma. The result is a comma splice. Here's an example. I like ice cream. It is perfect on a cold day. Notice how those two independent clauses are joined with a comma. We have two complete ideas here with two distinct subject-verb sets. I like and it is. Because we have these two independent clauses joined by a comma, we know that we have a comma splice. There are three common ways to fix a comma splice. For each way, I'll show you an example of a comma splice and a correction for it. Note, however, that there is usually more than one correct way to fix a comma splice. The first way is to separate the independent clause with a coordinating conjunction, like and, but, or yet. I grow tomatoes every year. This year, they are more abundant than ever. Now notice how in the second example, I've added but to correct the comma splice. I grow tomatoes every year, but this year, they are more abundant than ever. The second way to fix a comma splice is to separate the two independent clauses with a semicolon. This technique works especially well if the independent clauses are closely related. The tournament is over, our team lost. Notice how in the second example, I've now added a semicolon to show how these two closely connected ideas fit together. The third way you can correct a comma splice is to place a period between the two independent clauses. This works especially well if the ideas don't seem especially closely related. Summer is nearly over. Next year, we will probably go camping again. These are two very distinct ideas, best separated with a comma. In the following exercise, you will have the chance to practice identifying and correcting comma splices using these three techniques. Make sure to distinguish carefully between dependent and independent clauses so that you don't overcorrect a perfectly good sentence. This will take practice, but learning to avoid and correct comma splices will ensure that your ideas come through clearly and logically in your writing.